120, Serious Gaming and Simulations. Week 1, Introduction, Video Clip 2 of 3. I'm Professor Bill Kapralos, and over the next few minutes I'm going to talk to you about simulation. More specifically, I'll introduce simulation, define it, and provide a brief historical overview. However, before we begin, here's the list of analysis questions for this particular video clip. Number 1. What is simulation? What does it mean to simulate, and what is a simulator? Number 2. Differentiate between physical and virtual simulation. Number 3. Why use simulation? Or in other words, what are the benefits of simulation? And finally, number 4. What are, or what were, the two main driving forces or applications of simulation? So what is simulation? I think it's safe to say that we all know the term, and we've all heard the term, but what exactly do we mean when we refer to the term simulation? Are we all referring to the same thing when we use the term? There's probably many different mental images that are conjured up by the term simulation. Perhaps some of you are thinking of computer simulation, others are thinking of virtual simulation, some are thinking of flight simulator, some are thinking of physical mannequins used in medical education to train doctors and nurses. And yet others may even think of games. All those, by the way, are examples of simulation. So let's begin with a definition of simulation. And this definition is provided by Becker and Parker. And although there's various definitions, essentially they all mean something along the lines of the process of designing a model of a real or imagined system and conducting experiments with that model. The purpose of running the experiments is to understand the behavior of the system or to evaluate strategies for the operation of the system. Assumptions are made about the system and relationships are derived to describe these assumptions. And this constitutes what's known as a model that can reveal how the system works. Now, of course, hinging on this definition is this concept of a system and of a model. So let's begin with system. A system, it can be defined as a collection of elements that act together to achieve some goal. And with this definition, we can now define a model. So a model can be defined as a description of the system that you wish to study. You start by describing the elements of interest, which often end up becoming the variables and their behaviors. And the behaviors are those things that the element that can and cannot do, as well as the relationships that they may have amongst each other. So a model itself doesn't have to be a description of a real-life system, but it does have to be consistent. And that's very important. A model must be consistent. It doesn't have to necessarily refer to a physical model. You can develop a purely mathematical model, where it is possible to describe the properties and behaviors of the model only using mathematical formulae. Of course, for the duration of this course, we're not concerned with purely mathematical models. The model is essentially a way of describing a system, whether the system is real or fantasy. And that's another key point here, that the model itself doesn't have to be a real-world model. It can be purely fantasy. More on this later. So a model will likely not be able to describe everything that there is to know about any given system. And more specifically, there are very few, if any, perfect models available. So your description of the model and all the types and the types of values and relationships you include will determine what you can do with the model. In other words, your model is only as good as your description of it. And it's important to know what you plan to do with the model right from the beginning, because that will dictate how well your model is described. So with this concept of model and system, we can now have another view of simulation. And we can look at it as the implementation of a model, regardless of whether you are creating a computer-based simulation or a live-action training simulation. And this is also very important. Although it's probably obvious, simulations do not necessarily include a computer. Simulations can be purely pen and pencil based, or pen and paper based, for example. When we are referring to computer-based simulations, basically the simulation will ultimately be expressed as a program or a set of programs on some type of computing device, whether it be a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, such as an iPad, a cell phone, PDA, etc. And of course, when we're dealing with computer-based simulation, which of course the majority of this course will focus on, you need to have a precise and unambiguous description of the model that you wish to implement. You need to know how to describe your model using a form that you can turn into a computer program without much difficulty. We won't ponder on this point right now. We'll discuss it later. And of course, when we're looking at computer-based simulations, externally, they can be roughly grouped into two main types. We can have experimental simulations, which seek to answer some question, or we can have experiential simulations, which provide an environment with which one or more users can interact. And of course, for the duration of this course, we're going to be dealing with experiential simulations, where again, we provide an environment with which one or more users can interact. So experimental simulations are used to answer what-if type of questions. So for example, what is the optimum timing of traffic lights? What is the optimum number of cashiers to be working at a grocery store during rush hour, etc. Now that we know what a simulation is, why bother? Or in other words, what is the purpose and the significance of simulation? Well, there's a number of reasons why we would want to actually simulate a system and corresponding model. When we're dealing with experiential simulations, which of course we will be dealing for the remainder of this course, they essentially provide a safe, cost-effective, and ethical means of training and education. So in other words, simulation provides a means of learning. In fact, simulation is a powerful learning tool when learning outcomes are clearly defined. And simulation may involve a wide range of techniques and approaches that are applicable to learners at all levels. So we may have simulations that are geared specifically to novice trainees and learners, and we may have simulations that are geared specifically to expert trainees and learners, and everything in between. It's also important to note here that simulation itself is not dependent on high or low fidelity technologies. So a simulation could be a very simple paper-based activity. So just to reiterate, a computer or a virtual environment of some sort is not necessary for a simulation. A good example of a simulation that does not employ a computer or a virtual environment is role-playing. So when we look at simulation and learning, there's another term that comes to play, and that is simulator. So what exactly is a simulator? So according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it's one that simulates. And more specifically, it's a device that enables the operator to reproduce or represent under test conditions phenomena that are likely to occur in an actual performance. Or you can look at it as a machine that is used to show what something looks or feels like, and is usually used to study something or to train people. I like to look at simulator as something that implements a simulation. And when we're dealing with simulators, you probably have already seen many, including flight simulators and mannequins that are used to train nurses and doctors. So now that we were presented with an overview of simulation, we know what simulation is used for, we know the benefits of simulation, I'm going to spend the next few minutes just briefly discussing a historical overview of simulation. So the first simulations were probably military-based, and they're stories of Roman soldiers using a tree trunk, which they used to represent a human enemy soldier, and they used this to practice with their sword. This was later developed into logs hanging on a rope, and this introduced movement. So in other words, their model of an enemy soldier, represented by a tree trunk, was now able to move, which represented a greater, more faithful representation of an enemy soldier, human enemy soldier. This then evolved to work from horseback and boats using wooden figures to represent enemy soldiers. Again, the model evolves, and improvements continued for centuries, reaching the current state. Computer simulation really gets its start during World War II. Prior to that, of course, we didn't have computers, and simulations did not rely on a computer. They were purely physical based. One of the first simulators is the Link Trainer, developed in 1929, and it's a simple mechanical flight simulator developed by Edward Link to train pilots at an indoor location. So trainee learns to fly and navigate using a cockpit with a replica instrument panel. and no computer. This was again a purely physical simulator without relying on any computer. NASA has made extensive use of simulation and simulators since the advent of the manned space program, and in fact the Apollo moon missions relied heavily on simulators and simulation to train astronauts prior to their moon landing. Current focus on military simulation is on virtual reality-based technologies and serious gaming in particular. More on this as the course progresses. Another widely field of application of simulations is medical education. First medical simulations and simulators were simple models of human patients, and one of the first medical simulators was a fetal model and pelvis that was used to train midwives, and this was developed by Madame de Coudray in 1759. In general, medical education has been a large proponent of simulation, both physical and virtual. And over the past 40 years, there has been a very large emphasis on the use of simulation. Currently, in medical education, the emphasis is also placed on virtual-based technologies. So in addition to the physical mannequins that they use, virtual reality-based technologies are becoming a larger and larger part. And when we're dealing with medical simulation, the rationale for its use is essentially that by mimicking the basic functions of the human body, mannequin simulators provide a much more realistic training exercise than a traditional classroom lecture. In other words, simulation, especially when we're dealing with mannequins and physical simulators, they provide a very hands-on approach to education and learning. Despite some skepticism about simulation, some medical experts say that medicine, surgery, and general healing are too complex to simulate accurately. This, of course, is a minority, and in general, simulation has been widely accepted. And when we also consider the technological advances in the past 2 decades, we are now able to simulate practices from yearly family doctor visits to complex operations such as open heart surgery. And there is, of course, plenty of evidence to support simulation-based medical training, but the area is still somewhat open and much work remains. So this brings us to the end of video clip 2 of week 1, and we end the clip with a set of synthesis questions. So the first question: are there any disadvantages to the use of simulation? Why or why not? Second question: virtual simulations are superior to physical simulations. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Explain. And finally, number 3, for the purposes of this course, virtual simulations will incorporate a computer. What implications does the use of a computer have to the final product? Or in other words, to the simulation itself? And this concludes video clip 1.2. Thank you.